Welcome to this session of the DoD Cloud Exchange. My guest today is Louis Koplin, the Executive Director of PEO Digital Enterprise Services at the Department of the Navy. Louis, thanks so much for taking the time and joining us for the DoD Cloud Exchange.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
There is so much going on across the Navy. I was lucky enough to spend some time at the FCA conference in San Diego, where just learned so many different pieces and parts about the Navy's modernization efforts. But Louis, when we talk about IT modernization within the Navy, we always start with flank speed, the Office 365 unclassified effort. Give me an update. Where are you today with flank speed? Talk about some of those priorities.
Yeah. Well, first, I'd like to encourage everyone who wants to learn more about our priorities and where we're going to go to our website. It's www.poddigital.navy.mil. There's an industry button in the upper right, and the first link there is a whole industry book that lays out our vision, our mission, our goals. And for our industry partners, if you want to do business with us, how are the ways that you can successfully pitch us in terms of outcome-driven measures and the types of things that are going to get attention. So everything I say here is in line with that. And in case it goes by so fast and you don't want to listen again, please go ahead and get that booklet. So where we are in terms of our really our Zero Trust Cloud journey, flank speed being the Navy tenant, and then we also have the Marine Corps Microsoft 365 tenant. We're pursuing a few different lines of effort. We're maturing what we've already deployed. So there are still features coming that we're excited to pilot and to roll out at scale. Things like telephony solutions for dial in and dial out, which will really unify some of our communications and support long-term objectives about modernization of telephony across the Navy and Marine Corps. We're working very closely with DoD CIO and DISA, as well as our cyber operational forces, to think about the movement into IL6 and our secret modernization. And obviously some different, it's a different terrain on the SIPR side than it is on the NIPR side. If for no other reason, then there is no SIPR internet in the sense that we have it today on the commercial internet. So just a lot of the basic facts and conditions are different when we get to the secret level. That's a major thrust. And then what I would say is maybe our biggest push within PO Digital is to really continue our transformation of the entire enterprise information environment in terms of leveraging this Zero Trust Cloud to manage the devices that people use. The physical devices, the virtual devices, the mobile devices. So we've been talking a lot about our Nautilus effort, which is really taking that Zero Trust Cloud experience and scaling it across all those different formats and fashions. We had a really great opportunity to stress test some of that capability for our virtual desktops when we made a certain move on our VPNs, our virtual private networks. And we said, well, great, we've got this thing here that we've been piloting in line with our whole strategy through execution mindset about having different technology horizons and nurturing prototypes and really managing pilots as good prospects, and only then taking things to be mature enterprise services. We had this thing that was coming through the process already, and it was at a certain level of maturity. And we were ready. We could flip the switch, and we really scaled that very aggressively by maybe a factor of 7 in terms of overall usage.
I thought that was a great story from Ms. Rathbun, who talked about this at the FCA conference a couple months ago or so. Because of the VDI stress test, you had a vulnerability you were worried about that. Okay, we have to fix it, and then all of a sudden Nautilus, and so the timing worked well. So maybe let's talk a little bit about that Nautilus effort just briefly. It's a part of the Zero Trust Cloud effort. It's part of this idea of helping seamen and Marines basically work from anywhere at any time off any device. It's a big change. What's the PEO Digital role in that? How are you helping to manage that change? Because it's a technology change and obviously a process change and a culture change, of course.
Right. I mean, we are really helping to enable that change in terms of designing, delivering, sustaining this world-class digital experience. But at the forefront are our cyber operators across Navy Network Com and NCDOC and McCog. And they really, at the end of the day, are the ones that own and operate and defend the information environments. So from a DevOps perspective, we need to be hand in glove with them at all times. Their success is our success, and we need to be on the same page about what are those critical mission threads, where those critical mission outcomes that we can all rally around and say, this is the thing. One of the ways we do that is with our world-class alignment metrics. So we talk about things like reducing user time lost, improving customer satisfaction, improving our adaptability and mobility. And that doesn't just mean physical mobility like a cell phone instead of a workstation. It also means our architectural mobility, like moving from VPNs to virtual desktops, or whichever direction we move. It's our operational resilience, which includes cybersecurity, but includes many other things about, at the end of the day, does a customer not only have what they want, but is it there when they need it, even under adverse circumstances? And last but not least, certainly is cost per user. Overall cost is not the #1 factor, but it is clearly in our top 5. And it's how we get credibility with the comptroller and with OSD and OMB and the Hill to show that we're not just spending money, but we're spending money to good effect. And we're conscious of the total ownership cost. And we have that eye on sustainability, not just technologically, but fiscally as well. So those 5 world-class alignment metrics have really helped us collapse some of the conversations. But what we're specifically doing to move Nautilus forward is taking these efforts across the virtual desktop, the physical endpoint, and our mobile devices. And we're scaling all of them in line roughly with the Windows 11 mandate timeline. So that puts us around 18 months from now. And the goal is to have all these things, composed capabilities that can meet different mission needs based on the persona of the customer that we're supporting. So there are some personas that really virtual desktop is great for them, because either they don't get issued a government device, or they do today, but we'd like not to issue them a government device. The Naval Reserves have been big users of Nautilus Virtual Desktop. We have folks at artisans at shipyards and aviation depots who don't spend their day in front of a business workstation, but they do have occasional need, whether that's for email or time and attendance. So that sporadic use case is very amenable to virtual desktop. For our contractor support, today we often have to issue government devices to our contractors, and sometimes that makes sense. But in other cases, it would be great if contractor furnished equipment could be used, because they could just log into the virtual desktop. And then, as needed for other use cases. So that's really helpful in terms of figuring out where we focus our efforts. For the physical endpoint, though, most of our workforce does have physical endpoints today. And what this really lets us do is reset and go back to industry standard commercial configurations and commercial business processes that you can log into a device fresh out of the box, state of the shelf, and just by using your flank speed email or your government email, it will log in, connect to the server, configure, register the asset, do all those things, and then say 30 minutes, you're up and running. So that, talk about moving the dial on those world-class alignment metrics in terms of having a higher customer satisfaction experience and reducing the time from potentially weeks or days to hours or minutes. It knocks out of the park on many fronts. And that device is fully cloud managed in our zero trust architecture. So that's the great thing about zero trust. Typically, we see this trade-off between security and convenience, customer experience versus cybersecurity. But in the case of zero trust, it moves that entire curve up and to the right on our conceptual bar graph. So we're getting more of both. And that's really exciting when you can make the users happier with a more convenient, lower friction experience, and the cyber operators happier because they have greater control, greater visibility, more fine-grained control. And then the mobile devices, what we're doing there is we've got a pilot. It's really around not just government issued mobile devices, but BYOD, bring your own device. So we've now enrolled people working again with DoD CIO and DISA in a pilot that has sort of a walled garden, a zero trust approach on the device. It means your personal device does not need to be managed by the government because the government data is what's managed by the government. So that's still an early pilot, but I'm using it. Many others are using it. It's pretty good as long as you can set boundaries around work-life balance.
Always is the tough one, setting those boundaries. That's a whole conversation separate from what we're having here, though, Lois. We could
Yes.
spend the whole time on that. Want to go back to one thing you said. You mentioned the Navy Reserve. We're going to have them on tomorrow as part of the DoD Cloud Exchange, so that's really helpful. We'll hear more about their use of Nautilus and some of the other work they're doing to modernize. Let's talk about the pilot, though. You mentioned you're part of it, BYOD. Give me a little bit more. Is it a small pilot, 50 or 100 people? Do you have a few thousand people? And what are you trying to understand from that, and how does that kind of lead you, hopefully, down the path of expanding it?
Yeah, so we do have a few thousand people in, and we're continuing to work with DoD CIO about what the appropriate number is. This is a very empirical, data-driven pilot. So we're not coming in with a PowerPoint and saying, wouldn't it be nice? We're trying a little. We're making sure that we have red teams that come in and knowledgeable experts who can really throw rocks, and we want them to throw rocks because any outcome of that event is positive. Either we demonstrate an enhanced capability, or we discover a problem and then we can go fix it. So it's great. The more of that we can do, the better. And the results have been very positive in terms of the security of this approach. It's really several years old in terms of when it first got going. And so we've seen progressively better and better cybersecurity and better employment of zero trust principles. So as focus areas have emerged, they have been swarmed, they have been tackled, and they have been retired. And this does provide access to the native mobile experience. So using the actual standard Microsoft Teams app, Microsoft Outlook app, all those apps, not using a virtual desktop on your phone, but actually just using the normal mobile apps. So it's actually it's pretty slick, I have to say.
Eventually, you have to stop calling it a pilot, though. If it's been going on for a few years, eventually we got to call this happening in real life. So maybe that's the next step. Once
Well, yeah, I mean that is the idea with our technology horizons. In Horizon 3, this is something where we're watching someone else spend their money to do something that we're interested in, and we come to the table and say, hey, if you're interested, here's what we'd like to see. We can influence the way they spend their money. So we can partner with whether that's industry, IRAD, or working with DARPA or ONR, folks like that. This is something in Horizon 2 where we've now put PEO money at work behind this. But we will stay in Horizon 2 until it's mature enough to go to Horizon 1, which is where our enterprise services live. And we do have gates and standards and criteria for those. So in the DON CIO capstone design concept, the second of the 3 objectives was around adoption of enterprise services. And subsequently, DON CIO signed out a major design concept, which has standards and criteria in them, and 4 levels for each of these standards. So we can really use that not just as a punch list to get into Horizon 1, but as a design blueprint at the beginning of Horizon 2. So if at the end of Horizon 2, success means we get a gold star enterprise service Horizon 1, well, now we've got a schematic that we can design to and drive towards. So, yep, that's the process.
I know the DON CIO is pushing hard on enterprise services. Obviously, this is one example of that. the Nautilus is another one. The other one that I just want to touch upon as well is the Naval Identity Services. I know that's been on the horizon for some time. That's a key piece to the Zero Trust. You're using the cloud. Can you give us an update on NIS?
Yeah. So Naval Identity Services is maybe our flagship enterprise service in PO Digital. The designation memo we're expecting shortly to make it officially an enterprise service. And it's got a bunch of things that are really great. I mean, the one that I think people don't realize that I like the best is it allows us to do away with a SAR, a System Access Authorization Request, that DD 2875 form. Not because we're not doing those checks and balances, of course, but because there's a workflow and integration with authoritative data sources. So for instance, being able to pull civilian status data from DCPDS instead of having someone type it in, or from DMDC for the official defense manpower data. I mean, that's just great. It saves time, it saves effort, the data quality is higher. So then knowing that you've gotten access to an enterprise information environment when you onboarded, and now we don't need to fill out more of those PDFs, but all we have to do is update the attributes, which roles for which workloads are you going to get access to, and we have an automated and standardized way to do that. I mean, that's a real game changer in terms of our WAMs and user experience and time loss and all those things, while actually addressing financial audit, fire findings around IT general controls and access. Killing several birds with one stone there. Now, we've been live with Navy ERP for a while. We've been progressively moving other applications on board. It's got a few other great capabilities, like around privileged access management, around federation across identity data sources, and the ability to work offline, afloat, and disconnected. And this year, coming up in the next few months, we'll start work on the IL6 implementation to go secret. We're working on the integration with Marine Corps directory services, synchronization with the flank speed attributes. So it's in some cases retiring some legacy identity infrastructure, but in other cases it's integrating where it's already modernized and underpinning our Zero Trust cloud, and it brings additional capabilities in terms of automation and integration and control.
The one thing when you talk about it's about memos in the works to get this in enterprise service, what will that mean for you and PO Digital, or more specifically for NIS, Naval Identity Services, for it to be an enterprise service?
Yeah, I mean, there are two ways to look at this. One is that you don't need enterprise service designations, because if you build something that is lean, learning, and enabling, so it's efficient and it's lightweight, and it's responsive to feedback and gets better, and actually lets people do their jobs faster, quicker, more security, more cheaply. I mean, no one's not going to want to use it. So you build a world-class product and people are going to adopt it. But on the flip side, there's definitely value in the designation. For one thing, the process, I mentioned those standards and criteria, that really forces things to get to a certain level of maturity. And we don't want to put out something that is not credible. And I've personally been very defensive about what we call an enterprise service for that reason. I don't want to put something out that we announce as an enterprise service, mandatory use, and then people go and they literally can't order it. There's no website, there's no rate card, or maybe it's centrally funded, maybe it's not, maybe it's on less than a full ATO, maybe, we've seen these attempts in the past, and it really is corrosive to the mindsets we want to have with digital experimentation and scaling and innovation adoption. So the process is useful in going through and getting the designation. The other useful part about the designation is that it essentially becomes a part of the enterprise architecture. And we sometimes talk about wanting minimum viable architecture. We don't want to get carried away with our architecture efforts, but the ultimate point of the architecture is to help people by shrinking the decision space. And you really want to scale down your problems to the smallest chunk of problem that delivers value. So being able to take things off the table and say, you don't have to worry about account management. You don't have to worry about system access. You don't have to worry about privileged access management. Like those are big time consuming things and everyone needs to do them. And most people are not being funded to solve those problems. Funded to solve a combat coordination problem, a C2 problem, or to account for property, or whatever the case may be. Everything else about ICAM is a derived or secondary requirement. So being able to helpfully constrain engineers and architects and say, all these things are given to you and they're at a level of quality that you don't have to worry about whether it's good enough is huge for them. I mean, it takes a load off their backs and it really accelerates them and lets them shrink the problem space. And that the problems of cognitive load and domain-driven design are real. So anything we can do to mitigate those are great. I think that's the real power of an enterprise service designation.
It also at the same time provides Navy some standardization, some comfort, and especially the cyber folks to say, hey, if you're using NIS, it's gone through a certain baseline minimum, and we know that that application that you're bringing online using NIS is meeting those certain baseline standards, where previously, I imagine, we all understood the importance of identity management. DoD's had the common access card for 25, 30 years now, but that does not mean everybody was implementing it exactly the same. So I think getting that standardization is a huge plus as well, and from a security perspective.
Yeah, we want to avoid a tragedy of the commons situation where everyone says it's important, but not my job.
Exactly. All of these efforts that we've mentioned so far obviously are underpinned by the cloud. We got to talk a little bit about the cloud since we're here at the DoD Cloud Exchange, Louis. I want to start with Neptune, the cloud management office. I think last time we spoke several months ago, it was getting up and running. It was really helping with the education side, the concierge services, helping people really on that journey. Give me the latest with Neptune Cloud Management Office and how are they and that office helping make all this work?
Yeah, we recently went live with the first incremental upgrade of the cloud portal at digital.navy.mil/cloud. And we're going to be looking to accelerate the pace at which we deliver capability and enhanced information on that front. So FY24 is definitely a building year for us, and that's where we focus our efforts. It's still around getting applications migrated and modernized. But absolutely, we need to think about how we do that and that we're not pushing a rope, that we don't want to lift and shift an archaic application into a modern cloud environment and not really gain benefits, potentially even incur greater costs because it's not really a cloud compatible architecture. So being very deliberate about how we do that. Lots of things in flight now that I expect to see bear fruit over the rest of FY24 and into 25, whether it's those standardized onboarding processes, cloud maturity frameworks, standardizing some of our service models and service level objectives and agreements, the FinOps capability, really keeping an eye on the business command and control of our cloud environments and how we're consuming cloud and what is that costing in a near real-time fashion and optimizing around that. So it's pretty exciting, all the things that are happening with Neptune.
The FinOps piece and the standards, the service level agreement standards are really two important pieces I think a lot of people like to overlook when it comes to cloud. It's not the most exciting part. It's kind of the boring but important side. Can you just offer a little more? I talked to the Army CIO, Leo Garciga, earlier in the day, and he also talked about SLA and the importance of SLA standardization. What are you all looking at? How are you maybe begging, borrowing, stealing from others?
Yeah. I mean, Army's really been a pioneer, and we work closely with both ECMA and Cloud One because love everything they're doing, and I'm happy to steal what I can. And within the Navy, historically, there's been a decentralized approach, as is the culture of the Navy. So we have a lot of arrows in the quiver. And so our approach is really to take the best of breed within the Navy. We can hand out Neptune ball caps. There's no need for us to, pick this one over that one per se, but we can bring everyone to the table and then co-create that converged solution set. So saying, this works well over here, this works well over there, we've got a gap here, maybe we want to pick up something from the Army or the Air Force. What makes sense in terms of the coming months and years where we want to start to single up some of these things, and where does it make sense for us as PO Digital to come in and provide certain things on an enterprise basis? I would say most of our cloud service managers at our Echelon 2 CIOs are not real excited about spending command money on things like cloud infrastructure, the SCCAs and the cloud native access points, and those things see the value, certainly necessary. But those are things where probably we can be enablers to all those commands. They can still support their tenant mission owners. But again, having an enterprise service to provide that cloud infrastructure and to normalize some of those service models should make us a lot more effective and efficient.
And the same similar question around FinOps, the idea of understanding where the money is going, how you're spending it, how you're managing it. It's still very nascent in a lot of agencies. Where are you at with this idea of FinOps? How are you starting to apply it?
Yeah, we're taking a few different approaches. We're looking at both centralized and decentralized approaches. I think in general, it makes sense to optimize by cloud service offering initially, just to build that maturity, to understand the tools and the data within the different cloud service providers. We probably have the most mature FinOps capability right now in our Flank Speed Azure environment. So we actually do have the dashboards where we can see, as we scaled Nautilus Virtual Desktop, we could watch in real time as the number of active users went up, as the average active users went up, as the dollars went up, and making sure that we had tagged all that data correctly so that when we saw spikes, are these all actually attributable to what we think they're attributable to, or did some things get lumped together that maybe shouldn't have been lumped together? So we're learning by doing, and we're doing it in a way that solves actual problems, which makes it much easier to justify the people and the money spent on it than going out and saying, like, in theory, we want to solve this as a conceptual exercise.
I think you're right. Going back to what you said earlier, you want to kind of get your head around it. FinOps tends to be more complicated. Understanding, okay, why are the dollars going up? Do we understand the reasons? And is it more users or is it data issues? I've heard a lot of folks kind of get caught by that data ingress, egress challenges. So having that data of what you're spending, how you're spending it, where it's going is hugely important. Louis, we got about a couple minutes left. I want to hit upon one other area that you mentioned, I think, last time we spoke, which is this idea of setting up a couple centers of excellence for procurement and for DevSecOps. Again, these are all pieces and parts that sit on the cloud infrastructure that can make it easier for mission areas to take advantage of cloud services. Give me an update of where those centers of excellence are and how you foresee them kind of growing in 2024 and beyond.
Yeah, happy to. So like Neptune in FY24, we've been putting a lot of foundations in place for our Procurement Center of Excellence, or PCE, and our DevSecOps Center of Excellence, or DCE. So with the PCE, we're really working to think about the best procurement authorities we have available to us across the DAU contracting cone, if folks are familiar with that. And thinking about our different time horizons, there is a different procurement approach we use for an enterprise service than we use for a pilot. And so being good at kind of that decision logic about which authorities to use in which use cases is really critical, because we've seen problems in the past with people trying to do an 18-month procurement when all they really want to do was to get a few dozen of an item, an article, to do an experiment. Well, there are different procurement authorities for that. And likewise, when we're in Horizon 0 and we want to divest something in support of Operation Cattle Drive, well, we better make sure the terms and conditions support actually ratcheting down our spend. We don't want to, award something for 3 years, be on a glide slope across 3 years, and to be paying the maximum rate the whole time, and recoup no savings until after the 3 years. So that's really agility in how we procure, aligned to agility in how we architect and deliver solutions is the idea there. For our DCE, our DevSecOps Center of Excellence, it's really about DevSecOps as a culture within the PEO more so than the tools. DevSecOps tools like Black Pearl and McBoss are actually in a different part of the PEO and our platform application services portfolio, because the DCE is really about how do we work all the way across the PEO, across the IT lifecycle. So from initial demand through all the design, delivery, sustainment activities, that partnership I mentioned with our cyber operational forces and making sure they're with us throughout service transition, service operations, really applying the principles of Agile, whether or not it's this framework or that framework isn't important, but that those principles of working products, of being a little bit more focused on what we can deliver in the near term while still keeping an eye on the long-term North Star, not being overly precise in our long-range estimates when we know things are going to change between now and then. So really focusing on managing and delivering value. It's still cost, schedule, performance. We're still, making sure that we can show that we're accountable and in control of what we're doing. But it's about doing Agile correctly and delivering those early increments of value frequently.
Louis, I have so much more to ask you about, but unfortunately we are out of time for today. So first of all, let me thank my guest. Louis Koplin is the Executive Director of PEO Digital and Enterprise Services at the Department of Navy. Louis, thanks so much for taking the time.
Well, thank you. It was great to be back.
I'm Jason Miller, and you're watching Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more from the DoD Cloud Exchange.